Hello and welcome back to the podcast. So, today I'm going to be talking about relationship deal breakers. Just trying to get this screen sorted out. Right, there we are. Relationship deal breakers. So, big topic for people. Obviously, depending on different seasons of your life where you're at, the kind of experiences that you've had so far may have shaped these deal breakers for you, may have influenced your deal breakers. But having worked with a lot of people, what's really interesting is how many people are not really fully sure what their bottom line is, as in their absolute deal breaker, the stuff that they will not tolerate or accept from a relationship, no matter what. And I think, one of the best opportunities that you can have to explore this is in the aftermath of a recent breakup or when a relationship has ended. Obviously, exploring everything that has come up, everything that has happened in the relationship, the impact that that had on you, can give space to really sit with, what have I learned from this? What am I absolutely not going to tolerate again? What will I do differently in future? And I think knowing your bottom line, understanding why that's important for you, understanding what your absolute deal breakers are, can empower you going forward so that you're not operating from a place of fear. You're not operating from this place of, well, if this happens, how am I going to cope? How am I going to respond? But it's also being aware of, what your intentions are for future relationships, whether you want kids, whether you want to settle down, marriage, all those different things, and being clear on who you are and what you're about and what you want going forwards. And then recognizing, should you be in a relationship with somebody going forward and you're aware of these deal breakers and you've communicated these deal breakers, that you will then feel empowered to address the situation going forward. And I think, having spoken to a lot of people, it's interesting, the same themes come up around what they will and won't tolerate, but there's a lot of gray area here as well too. There's some things that people will tolerate and put up with and concede and compromise on that, other people might be completely against. So I think in this episode, what I wanted to run through was the most common deal breakers I've come across. Just talking about it, looking at it from a few different perspectives, and then I'd like to talk a wee bit about just some of the data that's out there on people's preferences, on gender deal breakers and stuff like that, because it's really fucking interesting. And I found a bit of it surprising as well, actually, just looking at some of the information that was out there. So I intend to crack on, and naturally, one of the biggest deal breaker, bar none, is going to be cheating. It's going to be infidelity. Any form of cheating or infidelity, bar none, is most people's deal breakers. That is one of those things that we would think would be commonplace. Everybody would share that view. I think working with a lot of people, what I would also say is that not everybody's circumstances and contexts are the same. It's not just a simple scenario of this person has cheated and now, fuck them, see you later, I'm going to axe them. Sometimes there's financial dependence, sometimes there's kids in the mix, sometimes there's legal implications as to why people can't just pull the plug on certain things and they will force themselves to try and make a repair, try and move through some things. And when you talk to people and they start speaking about their deal breakers, they start speaking about the hurts and the wounds they've experienced in the past. The reason cheating and infidelity is such a big deal breaker is because of the harm that it causes. It attacks the entire self worth, the self esteem. It fractures trust. It rocks the very foundation of the relationship. It affects respect. It affects the whole kind of ecosystem of a relationship. And it can be very difficult, even when two people decide to stay together, to make that repair in general. But it's also that thing of the pain that has been caused. Nobody wants to go through that if they've been through that before. So they will have that as their absolute bare minimum deal breaker. But I think just if you ever meet somebody that has stayed where there has been infidelity or there's, if there's a judgment coming off you, it's just important to have a wee bit of curiosity around that and a bit of empathy and compassion, because we don't fully understand, or we might not fully understand, why somebody may have, worked through that or let that go or stayed with a person. And the deal breaker for them mightn't have been as black and white, because they can still love somebody and still be really devastated and hurt by what's happened. And there might be a load of other stuff that's in the mix as to why that happened. But for the most part, what I will say is cheating and infidelity will always be top of the list. Whoever you speak to about deal breakers. Lying, manipulation, and any form of coercion. This is actually a really big one as well. So there's constant themes of manipulation, lying. And I'm not saying like you're going to immediately know if somebody's a pathological liar, but if you are starting to see that there's a theme of deceit, that the person's not really trustworthy, and we're talking about that trustworthy arc again, that idea of, can I relax around this person? Can I trust them? Are they who they say they are? Do their words match their actions? Is this really a safe, secure person to be with? Can I trust them? Can I let my guard down? Are they there for me? All those different things kind of center around integrity, center around honesty and transparency. And where there's any form of lying and manipulation, or even covert manipulation or coercion, um, that's a big, big deal breaker for people, because once they start to catch that, it's very hard to unsee it. And it's also the feeling that it creates in a person. It's also the pressure and the pain that it can cause in an actual relationship container when you're going out with somebody like that. And it might not be apparent in the very early stages, but for some people, if they've ever experienced that kind of behavior, like, of course that's going to be a deal breaker for them. You don't want to be going out with somebody that's actively manipulating you, actively lying to you and deceiving you, and you're catching that theme very early on, because that's going to be the house that you live in. You're always going to be questioning yourself. You're always going to be questioning that person's behavior, their intentions, all. Life's too short for that kind of shit. Next, name calling, being belittled, demeaned, or humiliated. That would kind of fall for me under that arc of emotional abuse. And if I'm just going to knock us all into the one kind of category, abuse of any kind should be a fucking deal breaker. Physical abuse goes without saying. Somebody trying to intimidate you, putting their hands on you, threatening you, hurting you in any kind of way physically, not respecting your boundaries. And I mean that in terms of physical safety. Uh, Emotionally, in terms of name calling, humiliation, demeaning you, degrading you, making you feel worthless, bringing up your past to humiliate or shame you, all those kinds of things, without setting a trigger warning here and going off on a tangent. Abuse of any kind should not be tolerated in any relationship. I know it's easy to say this, but part of the thing that people need to be aware of is having an awareness of what these behaviors actually are, and also recognizing that they're far more commonplace than what people would like to believe. Legislation is slowly starting to catch up to the impact of emotional abuse. So, when you can actually see that there's a theme of this in a relationship, you should not be in that container. It is so damaging to every aspect of your health and well-being, your mental health, your identity, your confidence, self-worth, self-esteem. It's just crippling, and it should not ever be happening. But if you do notice very early on when you're going out with somebody that name calling's creeping on, they're belittling you or demeaning you, or even if they're humiliating you or they're trying to humiliate you, look at the intention that's underneath that. Look at the impact, how it feels, what kind of person, especially a partner, should be doing that to you. It can't have any space in a healthy relationship. So, as I mentioned, control, intimidation, whether this is physically, mentally, emotionally, psychologically. I've spoken about gaslighting before and what that looks like. Sexual abuse, sexual coercion, that's a whole other conversation. But again, that shouldn't be happening. Financial abuse, digital abuse, all that kind of carry on. No space for it in a healthy relationship. Major deal breaker, and it should be a major deal breaker. A big one that came up as well, not just in my own reading, but for people in general, different life goals. So this might not be totally apparent from the beginning, but the best thing to do if you're dating or if you're in a relationship with somebody and you've got ambiguity or fear around this, fucking ask. Do not assume. Ask. Use your mouth. Use what it was for. Communicate. Ask the person outright, what does your vision of the future look like? Is marriage in the timeline for you? Are you thinking about kids? Have you ever wanted kids? If not, why not? Travel plans, is that in the future? Is freedom a big theme for you? Have you ever thought about settling down in X location, or is family important to you? All those conversations need to happen. And if somebody from experience tells you, look, I don't want kids, or this is a short-term thing that I'm looking for, I'm not looking for a long-term relationship, or whatever kind of stuff that they're saying in the very early stages, see it, hear it, acknowledge it, understand this person's talking about where they're at. This is not an invitation for you to try and win them over, to get them over to your kind of way of thinking. You have to see the whole human being. You have to realize that there's complex reasons as to why people feel and think the way they do. The expectations that they have for their own life, their hopes, their dreams, their ambitions are very personal and unique to them. And you're really viewing it from the lens of compatibility. Is this going to factor in and fit with what I want for my life? And I wouldn't say that that's selfish. I'd say it's more in a place of self-care, and actually, taking care of yourself longer term with who and what container you're investing your energy into, because you want alignment as much as possible. And I hope that makes sense for people. Now, that's not to say Deal breakers and expectations, I find with relationships will evolve. As a person grows and certain things happen in life, they can reevaluate these things. But for the most part, some people might have very rigid ideas of what they want for their life, what they want for their future. And look, when somebody has a crystal clear image and direction, all the rest of it, and can give them certainty, and that's brilliant. But that might not be the case for everybody that you meet. And sometimes people can be out of integrity where their words don't match their inner values or their inner actions or what they really want. And that can obviously be very misleading and frustrating, and that can be a deal breaker for people where they're like, oh, well, I don't want kids now. Well, we've been going out for X amount of years, and you have to reevaluate, and your time is your most precious commodity. So have the conversations as the takeaway. Use your mouth. Ask. Do not assume. That's a good goal for couples anyway. If you've got an assumption coming up, or you find that you're trying to mind read, or you find that you're trying to figure some shit out, ask. Asking is the most direct way to get to the root of the conversation, provided the person is able to hold decent space and communicate openly with you. Another deal breaker that came up for people, and I can kind of understand this one, although it's kind of more complex and it's a bit difficult. If you're going out with somebody who has issues with addiction, any form of active addiction, one of the big deal breakers that had come up is if they're still actively using a certain substance. And by that, they're not seeking help. They're not in active recovery. They're not in active community. They're not taking responsibility for seeking help, seeking support. And they could potentially be a risk or harm to themselves, or it could be harmful for a person to be in that system or mix with them. Now it affects everybody in that system, and obviously the person needs help and needs support. But from a deal breaker perspective, if this might land for some people that have ever went out with somebody struggling with any kind of addiction, that can be a really big deal breaker. Is it's one thing somebody having a setback and having a relapse and different things going on that have influenced that they happen, but have they taken responsibility for it? Are they in active support? Are they going for counselling? Are they getting their community to support them, to advocate for them, to keep them in that consistency so that they're actively in recovery, they're working through things? And if they're not and they're back in active addiction, that can be a big deal breaker for people. And I understand that it's not a clear cut thing for people, but that was one of the big deal breakers that had come up as I was looking through some of the information on this. One of the biggest, and I don't think it would be one of the things that most people would immediately think of, because one of the big things that we'll always think about is infidelity, lying, abuse, all these kinds of things. But somebody who has poor communication, or refuses to communicate, refuses to talk through things with you, refuses to compromise. They could have dysfunctional communication. They might be blame oriented. They might get angry. They might become overwhelmed. They might shut down, shut people out. They might storm about. If we look at all those kind of examples of poor communication, or everything might just evolve into a debate, or they might just ignore that there's an issue. They might try and sweep it under the carpet. They might just live in denial that there's anything going on, or they might expect you just to drop things and never talk about it. Communication is like the oxygen to a fucking relationship. And if you've got one person that's more growth oriented and wants to get to the core of the issue and wants to talk through things, wants to be able to make repairs, wants to be able to find compromise, and you've got somebody there that's willingly ignoring you, choosing not to fucking engage, choosing not to talk, not to work on a relationship, doesn't want to know, it's my way or no way, that's a fucking deal breaker. And that's a very, very big deal breaker, actually. That was one of the biggest ones that came back. About communication. So failure to try and compromise, failure to find a what's the word I'm looking for? Trying to find the middle ground, trying to find the compromise. But also, within communication, it's also that patterns of conflict. So if you're seeing the same themes come up, where they've got really aggressive ways of disagreeing, or, I spoke about the four horsemen before, like the constant criticism, defensiveness, stonewalling, contemptuous conversation and language. Obviously, there's going to be extremes within that, but if you've got really, really consistent conflict and there's not being repairs made, the person's just not apologizing, not trying to attune, not trying to get things back on track. Their communication's piss poor. They're making no effort at it. They're not trying to understand. They're not trying to find a middle ground. Or they're actively stopping you from being able to do this with them. Deal breaker. That can be a huge deal breaker for people. And look, that will also have another impact and different other elements of a person feeling supported, which is a massive need within a relationship. So what you'll find is, when you look at your core needs, what needs am I hoping they need? Oh, I can't speak today. What needs am I trying to meet from my relationship? And then that can filter under your expectations, both of self and the other partner, and what you believe their ideal expectations of you would be. But then your deal breakers are also centered around, if you're trying to meet these needs, what things are you absolutely not going to tolerate, and understanding why. Incompatible values, when a person knows what their core values are, then you can start to get your expectations in alignment, so that you're living true to you, you're living from a congruent place. If you appreciate loyalty and honesty, or maybe freedom, but then you're with somebody who's maybe dishonest, manipulative, very rigid and stuck, they don't like deviating, they don't like change, they're very resistant to change. You're going to have a clash there immediately, because you've got two completely different ways of seeing things and operating. And it's not to say people can't get on track, but back to what I said there about compromise and communication, if you've also got that problem in the mix, it becomes very, very difficult for that relationship to really fulfill its potential and for you to actually get what you need from it. And that's the thing, like that can be a deal breaker for people. Um, a lack of emotional support. This is a big one. And this is probably one of the biggest complaints that I would see even with clients. If you're going through something, or your partner's completely disinterested, and they're just not making any effort to attune to you. And I spoke about connection before. Like, if you don't have a core friendship, if you aren't comfortable in each other's space, you're not spending quality time together, you're not affectionate. And it's not to say you need to be over the top, but you need to be able to support your partner in a way that makes them feel connected to you. They want to know, were you there for them? Are you going to be attuned to them? Are you going to be responsive? Are you going to hold space for them? Can they be vulnerable with you? All those different things. And if that's not there, and you make no effort to understand your partner, you make no effort to be there for them, that's going to be a deal breaker, because it's like, what the fuck's the point? Um, just trying to fix that light. Like, what's the point? What's the purpose? You're in a relationship with this person. You're supposed to the relationship's supposed to be adding to the quality of life for both people, and yet it can't be one way traffic. Both people have to be getting their needs met. Both people have to feel appreciated, respected, and valued, and supported. And support is such a big, 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 big part of that, especially emotionally. When people are going through things, they're going to lean on their partner. They're going to want their partner to be there for them. They're going to want the partner to hold space. And look, this is a really important thing too. It's not about fixing the fucking problem. It's not about wearing the logical hat and being like, right, well, this is the way I see it, and then offering advice. Sometimes it's just about being there, just being present, just listening, empathizing, validating, holding space for them. And look, if they are looking for advice, they'll ask, they'll tell you, what's your take on it? What do you think? But sometimes even just being there for them to acknowledge, look, that's really fucking tough. It's really hard what you're going through. And I completely understand why you may be feeling like that, can go a long way than just disconnecting from the person and just offering advice, or talking at them, or talking about the problem, and just showing them that you're not really listening, you're not really present, you're not really attuned. Um, and that, like, if somebody is alone, as I mentioned, and they're hurt and in their pain and in their overwhelm, and they're looking for you and you're not there, or you're actively ignoring them, it's going to feel awful. They're going to feel lonely. They're going to feel resentful. They're going to feel disconnected within a relationship. And I'm like, what the fuck's the point? Why am I doing this to myself? Why is the person that I'm supposed to be in love with, that holds a space for me, that I'm wanting to share my life with, doing this? And if I've communicated to them that I need this to change, and they've shown me that they won't, well, you have to see that person. You have to see the choices and the behavior that they're making, and it is choice centered. If a partner communicates to me in need, and they tell me why it's important, and they express that they'd like me to meet that need, and I do my best to understand it, and then choose to do the complete fucking opposite when it's needed, and I do this over and over and over consistently over time, it's not a lack of understanding, it's a choice. And partners will eventually see this, and they'll go, the fuck's the point? What am I doing? I'm not happy, I'm not attuned, I'm not supported. And it's very disconnecting. And again, that can be a big, big deal breaker for people. Um, Another major one that came up: financial issues and financial irresponsibility. So that could be differences in spending, differences in saving, financial habits. Obviously, irresponsibility comes under that. Is the person really reckless and impulsive with money and spending? Have they got a lot of debt? Have they got the same financial goals for the future? Um, and that, I suppose, you could also weave that conversation on: do they expect you to be dependent on them to be dependent on you? All those different things financially are conversations that should be discovered through, even talking about splitting bills and stuff. If you live together and things like that, like, what is the financial expectations within the relationship. And I think some people get really triggered by this because money can be connected to survival, it can be connected to status, the sense of power and the power balance within a relationship. So some people get embarrassed, some people won't talk about these dynamics and they'll just expect people to get on with it. But again, these can be deal breakers for a reason. And I think it's important for people to actually lean into these conversations, because where there's a lot of stress and tension connected to finances, as I mentioned before, people go into survival mode and it can lead to massive escalations and or arguments and conflict. And sometimes the problem isn't the problem, but it's the coping, and it's about how we go about addressing this, but also being crystal clear on how we're being treated, especially when this comes to finances. And again, what I was saying there about the financial future, the spending habits, saving habits, impulsivity, all those different things need to be understood and discussed. Because I mean, if you're saving for a certain thing and you're paying for X, Y, and Z, and you've got these goals for the future, and somebody's out of alignment with that, and they're doing, really reckless behavior, spending money that's not theirs, running up debt in your name, and all these kinds of things, that can become major deal breakers. So one of the other big ones, and I'm sure a lot of people can probably understand this would also be quite high on the list, would be sexual incompatibility. And I think that could be a whole other conversation in its own. So where sexual needs are not being met, or where a person has certain preferences, we'll say, that are not being met within the relationship, that can become a deal breaker. Like, we're talking about slightly different things than, say, somebody struggling with sexual performance issues, or maybe there's issues post pregnancy, or the person's got performance issues, or there's all sorts of stuff that's there. There's certain elements of this can be resolved through communication, through psychosexual work or sex therapy, and then there's some things that can't. And I think when somebody is dealing with a lot of dissatisfaction sexually within a relationship, that can become a major deal breaker. And I think it's one of the higher reported ones, because look, if there's frustration and dissatisfaction, and sex is feeling like an obligation or a chore, or it's only benefiting one person, or it's not meeting a need, it's causing stress, then that can lead to the breakdown of a relationship. Because whether people like it or not, intimacy is a major part of a relationship. And we always think about physical intimacy, and we talk about emotional intimacy and emotional support, but at the core of that, the need to connect, the need to be physically intimate with each other and be close in that way, is very, very important for the health of a relationship. So this one's an interesting one. Not feeling supported around your mental health, that can be a major deal breaker. And I think, especially now in modern times, because we've more awareness around different things now, and I'm not a big fan of labels, but I think when you have an understanding that somebody's got a very specific thing that they're dealing with that contributes to their mental health, and they're really struggling, and they want understanding, they're explaining what this is like for them. I've got this diagnosis, or I've got this way of being, and I'm struggling to kind of cope. I'm saying kind of, I'm struggling to cope, and I'm giving you this invitation to understand what this is like for me, and the hope that you can meet me halfway and understand the kind of support that I need from you going forward. If you, as a partner, disregard this information, don't bother your arse to support the person, or you shame, belittle, humiliate, or make the person feel bad for having a mental health issue, that can just fracture trust. It can fracture any sense of connection within the relationship. It can also create overwhelm. It can create a massive dysregulation with the person. And it's also that idea that they will then feel like a burden. And I'm not saying they will, but they could feel like a burden within that space. But it's also, they will be unsupported in times of crisis, because they will have this feeling that they can't turn to their partner because, well, my partner doesn't really get it, or, they're disinterested, or they're dismissive, or they just tell me to fucking get on with it, or just get over it, or just, have you tried not thinking like that? Or, I can fucking say a million and one things, stupid things people say. But that person then is alone with a very, very serious thing that they're dealing with. They can't turn to their partner, so they don't have that emotional support. They don't have that understanding. They don't have that key person that they need to help regulate. And look, we do regulate with people. We've got co-regulation for a reason, because if I'm not able to regulate, somebody can hold space for me and help me regulate through them being regulated, if that makes sense. And just even having somebody there when you're going through a difficult time. And if it's not there, there's going to be a lot of frustration, overwhelming resentment. Of course, it's going to be a fucking deal breaker, because you're not going to want to be in a container with somebody that's going to make you feel that way about yourself. This one was actually a big one. I was surprised about how much of a deal breaker this was, but differences in political or social beliefs. was massive. And obviously, this is more global. It's not just within the UK, but I think a lot of this is because beliefs and the view on politics and say certain social issues are so skewed through a person's lens of experience. We'll say it's connected to their identity, and some people will just not budge on the expectation or deal breaker that a partner has to have the same alignment with those views. And that can be a major deal breaker. Even in the dating stages, that can be like, oh, if you think in America, oh, you're a Republican or you're a Democrat or you're whatever, fuck off. Just it's not happening. Or, oh, you don't believe that this is a proper social issue, or what's your take on this? Or, and that can be a major deal breaker, because people are looking for alignment, they're looking for understanding, they want common ground and with a partner, but they also want each other's views to be respected. And I think sometimes if people are polar ends of that spectrum, it can be very hard to reconcile that. And I think for some people that will just become a deal breaker for them. I'm trying to think, is this one relevant? I think because of a few notes here based on the stuff that came up a lot. Not being able to get your own space and alone time. And again, I think that would also come under boundaries and stuff as well. But if you've got a partner for whatever reason that's very smothering, very full on, I don't like that word needy, because everybody's just trying to get their needs met. But say even if you just couldn't get a minute to yourself, that can become a fucking deal breaker, especially if you're taking responsibility for regulating the other person, for that other person's well being, for that person coping. It can just be too much. And if you can't get space then yourself to go and decompress, to unwind, to ground, to attend to the self, you'll resent the relationship, and that can become a major breakdown and deal breaker for people. Irreconcilable differences in parenting approaches, and I can understand why this is a big one. Going out with somebody and talking, asking about their background is crucial. You need to know the kind of household that people came from. You need to know a bit about their journey. What was it like for them growing up? How were they parented? What was the impact of that on them? And I'm not saying we need to turn this into an investigation or a therapy session, but when we're understanding attachments and we're understanding expectations, if we knew that the person had a hard background, or one of their parents was very heavy-handed or a disciplinarian, or maybe it was the complete opposite. Maybe they were treated like best friends. There was no boundaries. They were out running around the street the all hours of the night. Or there were certain things that was going on in the house that shouldn't have been going on. Like, you need to know these things, because that will in part shape potentially how that person will parent themselves from their own frame of reference, with a caveat being that they've worked on themselves, that they've understood the impact on that, and they're not repeating that cycle. But say we don't, and we just partner up and we have kids, often you'll go to your original unconscious template because it's the only frame of reference you've ever had. And this is where these irreconcilable differences can come in, because some people might have very specific expectations of how they expect a parent, what way they expect children to respond, and what way they want their partner to support them within that. And if that was a major difference for people, in terms of their values, in terms of the way they want to parent, that can become a major deal breaker as well. This one I've heard so much, and I don't think it would be top of people's lists ordinarily when they think about relationship deal breakers, but it's a big one. I've heard this a lot. The person has a lack of ambition or drive, or just doesn't have any motivation. Seeing this in a person over time, in my experience hearing about this from clients, it's often like they just get completely turned off. A person that doesn't have a clear sense of who they are, what they're about, their vision for the future, what they want, a direction, a sense of passion, a sense of motivation, they just end up feeling very stuck and very lost. And often they can look to other people then to guide them. And that can create frustration, that can create resentment, that can put another layer of obligation and responsibility on another person. And I think in the dating space too, very early on, if somebody starts describing their life and describing who and what they're about, and they don't seem to have any ambition, or they don't seem to have any drive or motivation, it can be a bit of a turn off too, because people like confidence, people like certainty, people like leaders, people like people that know how to lead themselves, that know who they are, know what they're about, and have that drive. And if we think about it from an unconscious perspective, if I am looking to somebody to give me that direction, or I'm looking to like a partner to, guide the way for me, I'm not in my masculine, I'm not leading, I'm not stepping into that space in my own life. And then what is that communicating unconsciously then to the partner? And that's what I mean about that other layer of responsibility. They don't want to have to feel like a parent. They don't want to have to feel like they need to gauge you and take responsibility for you. Just my thoughts on it. This one, I always find this one interesting too. Per personal hygiene and standards. Now, I'll just start off by saying, look, this is different from somebody really crippled by a mental health issue who can't take care of themselves. We're talking about day to day, run of the mill, just people that do not have standards for personal hygiene. They just don't see the point in it. That can be a major deal breaker, both from dating and from relationships. Say, you didn't realize somebody was as bad with their hygiene until potentially you moved on with them. that can be a massive fucking deal breaker. Now, I know you'd be like, well, how would you know? Maybe you mightn't know until you actually love this person, and then all their ex start coming up and they start showing you who they are, and you're like completely overwhelmed and freaked out and grossed out by it. Now, we're all human and we all have stuff that we can improve upon and learn, but say there's just a complete disregard for it. And they're just like, look, fuck it, this is the way I am. That can be a deal breaker for people when it comes to personal hygiene. That's a massive deal breaker for people. Differences in cultural background, that would also come back, and the belief systems that we spoke about earlier would also include religious beliefs. So if you're dating somebody from another culture, it's imperative to understand what is their expectations within relationships. If he's were to have families, if he's were to settle down, he's going to be the same faith. Is there any gendered expectations that would need to come in there? What's a man's role? Potentially what's a woman's role, a mom's role, father's role? What is the cultural expectations or behaviors that maybe accompany that? You might have to have an understanding of the way the faith works, the way where the person's from, some of the cultural elements connected to that. And if that's something that you can't get on board with and you're only finding out later on, that can be a deal breaker. I spoke about emotional connection before from the place of emotional support. Again, if somebody's alone, overwhelmed, not supported, not attuned, not connected in a relationship, that's going to be a deal breaker, because they're going to be like, what the fuck's the point? What is the purpose of this relationship? Disrespect was a massive one that came up. I see this a lot with clients as a deal breaker. I've also been looking at a few studies. I'll talk about it at the end, but disrespect's a big one. Somebody constantly disrespecting you, whether it's in private or in public, in front of people or behind closed doors, whether it's in front of your friends, family, colleagues, your kids, anybody. A theme of disrespect should not become normalized or tolerated. It's never okay. And it just shouldn't become commonplace in a relationship. It's just not okay. And that is a big deal breaker for people. I spoke about unwillingness to resolve conflicts. Look, the biggest predictor of relationships breaking down is how they navigate and move through conflict and repair. If somebody is actively saying, look, when we fucking argue and disagree and we have conflict and I expect you to get on with it and not bring it up again. And I'm not going to talk to you about it, and we're not going to discuss it, and we're not going to make a repair, my way or the highway, that can become massively damaging, fracturing, disconnecting, and it can lead to the end of a relationship over time. Because look, people's needs aren't getting met. Conflict doesn't necessarily need to be avoided. If it's done in a healthy way, it can leave space for things to be improved upon and for understanding to take place. But if it's just somebody being a tyrant, whether this is male or female, or whether this is through really damaging forms of communication like stonewalling or guilt tripping and all these different behaviors that can happen when people are trying to manipulate and get their needs met or get their own way. The problem is, the longer this goes on, the more frustration and resentment builds up, the more that can fracture the relationship, and people will just be like, look, fuck this, I'm not doing it. And that can become a deal breaker. And again, that would also factor on people being aggressive, doing things to create fear or amping up their anger or their presence to shut down conversations. Same kind of thing. There's an unwillingness to resolve the conflict, and that would also be connected to the unwillingness to compromise, find a middle ground, my way or the highway. Different levels of commitment. I spoke about that earlier from that thing about different life values and stuff. Levels of commitment slightly different. Again, what I said, if somebody says very early on, I don't want fucking children, or I'm not getting married, or this is a short-term thing, or I'm not looking for a relationship. This is a big one that people will hear every now and again. We didn't. I'm not looking for a relationship. Oh, but he'll change his mind. She'll change her mind. It's like, look, listen to the feedback that people are giving you. Understand that they're talking about where they're at right now. And yes, that might change over time, but you're not rolling the dice on that. You have to be very aware, is this person aligned? Do they want what I want? Do they want me for me? Because we want the same outcomes, goals, and direction in life. And if they don't delude yourself and they putting yourself in a container where you could potentially get hurt, lose your time, and be exploited, and not be any better off for it. If you want a long-term commitment and you want certain things for your life and relationships, and this person's telling you early on that they don't, or you've actively avoided this conversation, you'd be surprised how many people end up in relationships where they're not actually defining what are we. It's just assumed, look, we're going out now. There's never been a conversation around it or what the long-term goal for the relationship is. And this is why I'm saying ask, don't assume. Use your mouth, use what it was for, have the conversation, be direct. Even if you don't like what you hear, it's all feedback. You'll understand, you can make informed decisions then. And the biggest deal breaker up there was trust. Lack of trust or trust being fractured. So this can be any form of betrayal, infidelity, as I mentioned, deceit, manipulation, lying, where there's a theme of trust being constantly broken, words not matching actions, promises being broken, integrity being compromised, betrayals, all those kinds of things. Not being there for them in times of crisis or in times of need. When trust is fractured and it's gone, that can be a major deal breaker. It can be so hard to get that back on track in a relationship. And that is something that I think most people will not be willing to compromise on. And even deal breakers from the early stages of dating or a relationship, if you think you can't trust this person and you've got an intuitive knowing in your body and it's like, oh, like I've got this gut feeling this person's not honorable and I can't trust them, and there's something here that's not lining up with what they're saying and what they're doing. That's all feedback. You need to tune on that. You need to see the person for who they are and how they're showing up and how they're behaving. Because look, if you're going to have a relationship with them, you need to be able to feel safe and secure with them. And if that's coming up for you and you're seeing it, or you're with them a while and that's starting to become the theme, you have to do something about it. You can't just wait for somebody to fucking change, because they might never. So I'm just going to run through some of these stats. And just on that, like, look, what is your thoughts on deal breakers? Is there any there that I didn't mention that are important for you? I'm going to run through some too that weren't on that big list. But a lot of these have come from different studies. They've also come from like dating apps and stuff. So this is fairly live information that's updated, that's coming on. So there was a study that was done, or a survey done, I should say, with a few of these dating apps, and the top three relationship deal breakers that came in that were listed by both men and women were disrespectful behavior. So it was 65% women and 50% men rated that highly. Lying was 63% of women and 49% men. And then cheating. Cheating was 69% women and 50% men. So again, the themes of honesty, trust, and respect will always keep coming up. And that's big deal breakers for people. What was the other one? So that was a good one. A study by the Journal of Evolutionary Psychology found people will be more likely to overlook a deal breaker if they perceive the partner as being very attractive. So again, you have to look at your motivations for being with somebody. Are they valid in who you are? Are you only tolerating their bullshit because they're good looking? And if you are, why? Like, look at the harm that it's causing you. A study done by eHarmony, or a survey done by eHarmony, the dating site, found the top three deal breakers reported by women were lack of chemistry, poor hygiene, and lack of ambition. So again, there was that lack of ambition one. It was interesting, the poor hygiene one came up there as well. The top three deal breakers by men were cheating at 69%, rudeness at 68%, and being overweight at 55%. So again, physical attraction, ambition, and interestingly, personal hygiene on that one there as well. What was that one? Communication problems were the biggest one that came in from the Journal of Personal Relationships. So this is one of the biggest deal breakers in longer term couples breaking down. So that would actually go with the findings of the Gottman Institute. So the couples that can't work through communication problems, can't solve conflict in a healthy and effective way, and can't make repairs are likelier to have higher relationship dissatisfaction and are more probably on track to potentially the relationship breakdown and end, because again, they've got solvable and perpetual problems. That's a whole other conversation. But if you can't navigate conflict healthy and you can't make an effective repair, it just means the relationship's in dodgy territory. So the dating app Hinge had the top three deal breakers as being reported by men and women were disloyalty, lack of emotional support, again, poor hygiene, that was another big one. Another study by the Journal of Social Psychology and Personality Science found that the biggest deal breaker from a cultural background was centered around unwillingness to have children, or whether or not. So that was from, what was the crack, what one? Individualistic cultures were more likely to report somebody being of low intelligence as a deal breaker. Right, okay. So if the person seems like they're not very intelligent. Elite singles, top three relationship deal breakers by men were infidelity, lack of emotional connection, and lack of communication. Top three deal breakers by women were infidelity, again, 85%, emotional unavailability, 69%, and lack of ambition, again, at 64%. So, look, some of these themes are going to keep coming up because I think it's important that people have an awareness, even from a gendered perspective, potentially what other people are looking for or potentially value, especially as deal breakers. So, thinking about even that from emotional availability, if you know how to hold a presence, if you know how to be emotionally supportive, if you work on your communication, if you know who you are, know what you're about, know your direction, purpose, and meaning in life, like you're automatically, embodying and exuding a different kind of energy. And I'm not saying be something that you're not, but look at it from that perspective about personal hygiene, all these standards, all these deal breakers. Think about how you would want to be received, and what way you'd want to show up in a relationship. Again, some of the other bigger ones that come on, Bumble found that the biggest deal breaker for its users be 65%. Was political beliefs, and 72% of people on the app said they would not date somebody who held an opposing political view. Height on one of the other apps was a massive dating preference. So that was 40% of women says they wouldn't date somebody that was shorter than them. And 30% of men said they wouldn't date somebody who was taller than them. Smoking was another really big deal breaker. So that was on Hinge. 80% of people said they wouldn't date somebody who smoked. And then for the grammar Nazis, poor grammar and spelling was a major turnoff. I'm sure there's other ones within that, but look, even if you just think about that physical attractiveness, like, and we think about height and weight and stuff like that, and we might often think, oh, it'll just be men that have these viewpoints. But look, I mean, this is what's interesting about these dating apps. We get live information that there is some parallels and overlaps in terms of the things that we value in terms of trust, loyalty, respect, honesty, emotional support, ambition, all those things. We have similar values, but for you as a human being listening to this, and again, I said this before, especially post breakup, you've an invitation now to think about what went wrong in the relationship. What could you have done differently? Could you have communicated your standards a wee bit earlier on? Could you have had certain conversations that could have brought certain things to light? If you're in a long term relationship and you haven't had any of these conversations and you don't really know certain things about your partner, this is an invitation to take this with the kind of, I was going to say take it by the horns, you know, lean into the conversation, take control of it, don't avoid it, have the conversations, find out where you stand, try and understand your partner's expectations, their deal breakers, all these different things, so that you can get on the same page. And if you find that there are irreconcilable differences, or you understand what your deal breakers are, you might even, from listening to this, recognize that some of your deal breakers have already been encroached upon or activated by certain behaviors that your long-term partner maybe have engaged in. And then that's worth exploring. Why have I not done anything about this? And what has the impact of this been on me? Um, what was the cost? How am I living now as a result of this? Has it cost me anything? Has it impacted my self-confidence, my self-esteem, the quality of my relationship? What would I do differently if I could do it again? You know? So, slightly longer episode this time. Very important conversation. I have a program coming out very, very soon. I'm fucking really excited to get it launched because there's a lot of people message me regularly post breakup looking for support. This is going to be for people specifically that are recovering from a breakup. It is probably the most in depth program I've put together. And I'm excited to fucking launch it. So if you're interested, send me a wee DM. I'm going to be putting out a wait list very, very soon. And I'm excited to get stuck on because it is literally going to have absolutely everything that I feel like somebody would need post breakup. They learn from it, they heal from it, to be able to move forward. We're going to have a community element. And I'm excited to get it out there. So I just want to say thanks very much for listening. Thanks for following the podcast. If you think anybody could benefit from this episode, or it might resonate with them or help them, please share it with them. If you have any thoughts, or if there's any deal breakers I missed, or if you just have any thoughts or anything on it, please engage with me on social media. Let me know what you think. And thanks very much for listening.